It is my great pleasure to welcome you to our first SparkTalks, many to be coming soon. Since we have an excellent lineup with 8 presenters, we're going to start off right away. And you'll be seeing me in the middle here to keep us going. So, our first presenter is Chris Cole. Chris Cole accomplished a BA in contemplative psychology in 2010, hosts the Waking Up Bipolar podcast, and is the author of The Body of Chris, a memoir of obsession, addiction, and madness. He offers life coaching for any number of mental health conditions, specializing in bipolar disorder and spiritual emergence. So without further ado, Chris Cole will be presenting Bipolar Order, Getting to the Heart of Sanity. Please, everyone, welcome Chris.
When I was 18 years old, I suddenly realized I was the second coming of Christ. It was quite the shocker. Shortly thereafter, I was diagnosed with bipolar disorder, which is a chronic mental illness marked by mania and depression with a chance for psychosis in extreme states. It wasn't hard for me to imagine that something went horribly wrong. I suddenly thought I was Jesus. I had an infinite spaciousness suddenly take over. It was like I didn't have any affinity for my body or even my name. I started running around my dormitory trying to find my first disciples. I punched one of my friends in the face, lightly. I was Jesus after all. I punched one of them in the face. I called him the devil. I ran to my dorm room lobby and I started preaching about heaven on earth. And I started telling everyone their assignment, how they were going to have a special role in this new world. When the campus police came in, I knew that they were here as the Pharisees taking me to my crucifixion. When I got to the jail cell, I stripped off all my clothes and I started demanding that they come look at my naked body to see that I was neither man nor woman, that I was God. They pointed a weapon that looked like a gun. It might have been a taser, but I don't know. And they told me to climb into a chair, and they restrained me. And when a man took out a syringe and he stuck that needle in my arm, I was certain that it was lethal injection and that I was dying. I rose in about 3 hours in fulfillment of the scripture. My parents came to bail me out, and they were certain, or at least they thought, that I was on drugs, and it wasn't a bad guess. I had a very extensive substance use history already. But after about 2 days of me trying to convince my father that he was Joseph, telling my mother she was the Virgin Mary, and saying that God intercepted my father's seed and that I was indeed an immaculate conception, calling my dear friend and telling her that she was Mary Magdalene and that it would be different this time. This time, we could get married and we could have sex. In the hospital, I remember a psychoeducational class, and one of the doctors was at a whiteboard and he was listing off symptoms of acute manic psychosis, one of which was grandiose delusions. And I remember him saying, some people get so grandiose that they think they're the reincarnation of God. And my hand shot up. And I said, that happened to me. And he said, you better talk to your doctor about that. Afterward, I started to really consider what exactly happened and how much was God and how much was faulty brain stuff. And I did as any good 18-year-old addict, and I rebelled. And I said, this is bogus. If I just stop drinking so much Red Bull and vodka, I'll sleep. And then if I sleep, I won't go psychotic. It made sense. And over the years, I started to really consider, I was even haunted by spirituality. How much of that was spiritual? I started reading about stories of spiritual awakening, not just in the Bible, but Eastern stories. And I thought, that's not so unlike how I felt, at least parts of it. And so I started to sincerely pursue spirituality. And when I did that, I found a real draw to energy healing. And I started practicing yoga, Tai Chi, and Qigong, only they didn't have those names because I was in a cult. Oops. I was from the South. It was 2005-ish. I had never been to a yoga class. So I just was like, okay, this is yoga. Everybody's into yoga. And I had to go back to the hospital. And it was much less chaotic, but much, much more painful, because this time I legitimately thought I had a case for enlightenment. This time I wasn't actually Jesus. I was like Jesus. This time I wasn't actually the Savior. I was like the Buddha. And I was most like a prophet. I was actually most like Bob Marley. I was like a white suburban Bob Marley with zero musical talent whatsoever. And I was going to emancipate my people from mental slavery. And when the inevitable darkness of depression finally came and inevitably came, and I felt so far away from those spiritual impulses, for the first time in my life, I felt like life was absolutely not worth living. And not only that, but I felt like all forms of spirituality must be mental illness, must be delusion, and at the very least is magical thinking to avoid the inevitable suffering of human existence. And if it wasn't for the love and resources of my family, I don't know that I'd be here today. And I think that some spark of hope came back because of how resourced I was and because of how loved I was. And I hit what's often called in 12-step recovery, rock bottom. And I knew there was no way I was going to ever have a life worth living unless I could get sober. And so I asked my parents, I begged, I said, this is it. I finally want this for myself. For the first time, I consented to treatment. And my parents sent me to the best treatment money can buy. And that took me from Atlanta, Georgia, to Boulder, Colorado, where I think some of the finest mental health institutions treatment centers are, in no small part because of Naropa University and the healers that come out of this place. And somewhere along the lines of 12-step meetings and individual therapy and group therapy and meeting some of these Naropa people, I started to believe I could use my pain in the service of others, that I could be one of these healers that come out of Naropa in droves, right? And I got the crazy idea that I would apply and enroll at Naropa University. And the most profound, and I can't say any one thing did it, but the most profound thing for my recovery is I learned mindfulness techniques. And I learned them in a responsible and ethical and practical way. And for the first time in my life, I contacted a love that was inside me. That was the very nature of who I am and who we all are. Only previously, this love was available in psychotic states, in states of madness, and I didn't think it was possible in any other way. Psychosis and spirituality were fused. They were the same for me. It was the only time I actually felt wise. It was the only time I actually felt like I was loved. And in my continued recovery journey, I thought about that 18-year-old kid. And I thought about how he needed a supernatural love because he had no way of understanding how on earth he was going to find the love he needed. And so from this place of self-love, I fell in love. And I met the woman I call my wife today. And as I opened up my heart and tried to make a bigger container to love not just myself, but someone else, I started to notice that recovery wasn't so easy. I started to notice that all the little ways in which I thought I had kind of arrived at love were challenged when I was trying to hold love for another in this way. And so I had to do more work. I went to therapy and I started working on the deep, painful issues of sexual shame, body dysmorphia, disordered eating, and all the ways that I had traded in embodied authenticity for disembodied safety. And I felt like if I can love this person from this place where she sees my nakedness, if this person can love me and see me even more clearly than myself, surely we should get married. And we got married. And shortly after we got married, I got sick. Not so much, let me say this. I had a respiratory infection. I had to take a course in corticosteroids because I have asthma and I could barely breathe. And for those of you that don't know, corticosteroids can induce psychosis in a small percentage of the population. And so after 5 years of sobriety, 5 years of thinking that I had put this bipolar disorder behind me, I was psychotic in 3 days. And I had to reopen the case. And my wife and I, we trusted my sanity. It had been years. And we tried to get back there. And in some ways I got back, and in some ways I never did. I became obsessed with enlightenment, theorizing about all the transpersonal riddles that were still out there, how much of spirituality was outside of humanity, how much of it was inside, how much of it was material, immaterial, how much of it was just yet realized humanity. And I started dreaming up all these different models and programs and ways in which I could teach people this. I called it MESSY, Model for Emotional and Spiritual Integration. And like a mad scientist, I saw that the nature of the soul from an emotional standpoint is sorrow because it's disconnected, it's separate from God. And the nature of God from an emotional place is joy. God realization was joy. And even farther than that was non-dual awareness, where no separation remained. And my theory was that love was the only reason to ever come back from that place. And so I saw that all forms come into existence, not from an incompletion or duality, but because of love. that love is the most powerful spiritual and human reality. And while I was theorizing about love, I became a father. And I had to put love into practice. And just like I had to create more space in my heart for my wife, I had to create more space in my heart for a child. And I would rock this baby to sleep, sing him songs, and I would watch his sweet face as he drifted off. And my arm fell asleep, and it was so painful. But I wouldn't dare move. And as I looked into his sweet, soft face on my arm, tears would start streaming down my face. Because I knew there was no way I was going to be able to be a force of love in this child's life and continue surfing waves of madness. And so not from a place of brokenness, but from a place of wholeness, a deep insight into wholeness. I went back into the psychiatric system, which I thought had done me so wrong, had gotten it so wrong. I was forced to find the bipolar order in so much disorder. I have 2 sons today. One's almost 6. One just turned 4. At night, it's a wonderful opportunity, a spiritual practice, if you will, to consider, how did I love them? And how could I have loved them better? Not more, better. I don't say prayers, I don't meditate with them, even though that's part of my practice. I just ask them 2 questions. 1, how much does Daddy love you? And they're so excited to say in unison, infinity. And the second question is, what does infinity mean? They say, it goes on forever and ever, and it never ends. That is a sanity worth staying for, worth staying with. That is a love available to us all, right here, right now. And that is a bipolar order that I can put my entire life behind. Thank you so much for having me.